right, welcome to the podcast, Connecting the Dots. I'm here with Sam Kuehnle, which I just figured out how to pronounce perfectly. So I'm awesome that you're here. Glad to have you here, man. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited for this chat. We were talking a little bit beforehand. Like, these are phenomenal questions that you're going to be getting into today. And I already am knowing, how do I get to this level for the podcast that we're starting up? So I'm looking forward to answering questions that have never been asked and just seeing where the conversation goes.
That's amazing. And first of all, congratulations. I heard it was big news. This is also why we delayed a little bit. So congratulations on the first child.
Thank you. Yeah, she's keeping us on our toes.
The first ones are the best ones, I heard. I'm not sure. I'll let you decide later on.
I'll come back in 18 years and answer that question.
Fair enough. Maybe just start because I know you, but just give us a breakdown on you basically in a few seconds.
Yeah. Sam Kuehnle, VP of Marketing over at Loxo. Loxo, super quick pitch, talent intelligence platform. We help recruiters not just have more candidates identified or passed along to the hiring manager, but more of the right candidates. We want to make sure that customers are making the very best hire for that possible position and company. So that's a huge differentiator for us. But back on the personal side, I've been in the B2B space for over 10 years. I've worked at a $1 billion+ annual revenue, publicly traded company, been agency side, working with a number of VC-backed startups. And now I'm back in-house at a bootstrapped, 100% customer-funded company. So a lot of experience, a lot of things that I've seen go well, not so well, and always learning, right?
Oh, that's amazing. Before we get into the marketing stuff, because you already started into in the marketing space, I want to take it a step back basically, because we figured something out. So before becoming in marketing, there was some other stuff you were doing. If I notice why it's more like soccer player, physical therapist, physiologist, like a little bit of everything. So could you just walk me through a little bit of those earlier interests and how that changed your approach to marketing?
Yeah. Call them childhood dreams gone wrong. Not gone wrong, but didn't quite pan out. So professional soccer player. Yeah. I mean, I grew up playing soccer, played through college. Dream growing up, it's be a professional soccer player. I'm sure you've seen it in the States. If you want to go be a professional soccer player, you're going to need a second and third job to support that income if you're not at the top level. So I wanted to be a professional soccer player. That really introduced me to the world of like physical therapy and all of that, injuries, other things. So I was always interested in just the human body, how it works. And then in college, got super fascinated in psychology. Thank God my parents kind of redirected. Were like, you probably don't want to be a psychologist growing up, but it's a great skill to have. So yeah, tying those back to marketing. I mean, soccer player, 3 core things. Like you've got teamwork. You have to be able to work well across an organization, sales, CS, operations, all the people, discipline. So in marketing, this is something I'll always come back to. I'm sure we'll touch on it here, but it's like being able to stick to and do the fundamentals very well instead of trying to always go after the shiny thing. Like, yeah, you can learn to do a rainbow in soccer, but when are you going to use that in a game? Never. Like it's not practical. And then accountability. So you're accountable to your team and a result. So in marketing, like you should own a number. So being able to live up to all of those. Physical therapy, when you look at the root of it, it's like, okay, you've got an injury, so you need to diagnose it, analyze it, treat it. So let's just take that over to marketing. Diagnose, analyze, treat your acquisition strategy. So you could look at something like, late stage tactic might not work well. Is it because that tactic isn't working well, or an early stage input isn't doing what it should be to power that late stage item? So just helping to understand, is the injury really the root of it, or is there something else at play that you should be thinking about? And then psychology, empathy, place yourself in the shoes of others. We'll get to this later on. Like one of my favorite exercises to do with leaders is just like take off your CEO hat, take off your sales hat for a second and think about how you would do this as a buyer. So all those have really helped just, as I say, kind of like get me to, I don't know, the KFC secret blend of herbs and spices of where I'm at today with some of my marketing stuff. But yeah, it's been fun to see how it all has pulled together.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love the hats, by the way. I didn't know about the hats, but that's crazy because probably maybe they do it at Amazon, maybe not. But I remember that there was a story about Amazon where they would have like a literal person or like a hat inside the room, and then that would be the customer, and they would always be in the room. So I love that you were giving the hat story, because I think a lot of companies can benefit from that. Not even just having the customer in the room, but actually saying that they've talked to a customer. So I don't know a lot of people that actually have talked to their customers, basically. I would love to see that.
Easier said than done.
I was watching this episode lately. It was what is it called? So these CEOs of big companies that go undercover. I think it's Undercover Boss, basically.
Yeah,
absolute big fan, because you start to realize how much they learn by just joining the team for like boots on the ground for just a week. And they just learn so much going back to headquarters. Like, okay, this is actually what we discovered. It's fucked up.
Yeah, if you
More
want,
leaders should do that.
If you want an eye-opening experience, go secret shop your own organization. You'll uncover some good and some like, we need to fix this things.
Is that what your background in sports that like influenced like teaching you these, different hats, or like where did you really like learn this, like people should wear different hats or take off their hats?
Sports has helped, and a lot of just experience, and I don't know, I always get back to like, I just call it common sense at the end of the day. We get so wrapped up in like tactics, wanting to do things a certain way, where if you're so far zoomed in, you forget the bigger thing, because you think of this perfectly structured marketing program. If they click on ad A, serve them ad B. Then when they click on ad B, serve them ad C. They click on ad C, they're ready to buy. Let's get them in touch. The reality of it is I can't think of a singular experience in my life where I've ever gone through that type of flow or been magically ready to buy. Yep, you convinced me after ad C that I'm ready. So a lot of that is where I say just go back to some of that. But yeah, I mean, sports has helped some of it, but really that's the sports side has really just been like, if you don't work together, the team will fail. Simple as that. So that's where I sometimes say, don't get so caught up in thinking marketing's more important than sales, or one touch point's more important than the other. It's the aggregate of, if your defense is garbage, no matter how many goals you score, you're going to lose because they're just going to pour them in on you instead. So you all have to work together in that way. So yeah, I guess that's kind of helped a little bit there, but
well, we're going to dive into that topic in a second, because I have a few attribution questions for you lined up later on. Oh, that's going to be fun. But before we get there, so what I understood is you grew up in a household of, I think, 3 generations of advertising professionals. Was that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
How did that shape your mind, basically? I've heard psychology, which I guess is part of marketing. Maybe not football. I guess that's a different thing. But like, how did that shape your like look on advertising from early age?
Yeah, it was interesting. An analogy I might think of is, if you teach your kids new languages when they're young, they're more likely to pick up on it and speak it well later on, right? So I think part of it was learning by osmosis. It was just always discussed in the house. I was always surrounded by it. So I think I just naturally was more attentive to it a little bit, just with all those conversations going around, joining for business calls, like when he would literally go and call on a client, show up at that place. So that was part of it, just hearing it, seeing it, how it all came together, and understanding from an early age that proper marketing or advertising. So the advertising that they did was a very traditional TV, print, radio, like back in the day before digital and all that stuff. So what I learned through that, though, is that was a critical lever to business growth. That's how you got new customers, but it needs to be done properly and with a well thought out plan. So you don't just go and put a newspaper ad together. You don't just go and write a TV or radio spot. You have to think about it. You have to do it well. And I think that's where the digital age has been a blessing and a curse, because it's very easy to just slap an ad on LinkedIn, but is it the right message? Did you think about it? Is it hitting the right people? Have you thought out the plan for it, or are you just kind of going through the motion? So that was something that I learned from it a little bit more. It's like, don't just think before you do.
Oh, love that. Preach. But it is completely, like, I always say, like, any 60-year-olds can actually now with a credit card can run ads. That's not the hard part. The hard part is really not like the technical. Okay, there's some technicalities that you need to understand and all that stuff. But yes, but they're not rocket science at the end of the day. You put in the work, 1 month later, you're there, basically, in terms of technical and setting up an ad. That's not the difficult part. The difficult part is really the planning before that and understanding the research that was done, that the whole thing. And indeed, what you're mentioning is like, you can put up a lot, like we together, we could punch up an ad in like what, 30 minutes, something like that. Launch an ad, there's a landing page, done. But is that really going to convert? Is that really going to be it? Not really.
Exactly. Yeah.
So indeed, it's been a curse. It's been a curse and a blessing at the same time. We can iterate fast, but sometimes I feel, and for me at least, I see is that we iterate on the wrong things. Basically, if from the beginning your planning or your plan is wrong, you can iterate on copy, but it's not the copy that is going to get you there. That's not it. It's the whole plan that fails. But people just iterate on the last part because that's where they have control on.
Mm-hmm. Iterating on cost per lead. Let's get this a little bit lower. It's like, well, I hope your cost per leads are converting and everything. So yeah, different rabbit hole we'll get to.
Yeah, exactly. In that regard, so I had another question, but I think you already answered that one in terms of the childhood that influenced your work today. I think that's how you see it, I guess. So the marketing approach really said, okay, how do I do this properly and plan this out properly? Even for TV ads, it takes like months to get something live. Like you don't just, oh, let's experiment on a TV ad. You don't do that. It's like you do it properly or you don't do it at all.
Yeah, you're talking about a major investment there. I'm looking at that right now, getting some videos produced, and yeah, those aren't cheap. And you really have to think it out if you want it to be a good video ad. So yeah, that's the...
You don't just experiment with great content. You just have to do the great content. It's not like, oh, let's put this as an experiment. Like, yeah, it's just a big bet, and that big bet just needs to be filled in because all the rest relies on it. It's not just an experiment.
Yeah. Yep.
But we'll get to that in a second. Basically, the second chapter I just want to talk is your career as a growth leader. So I feel you had I would say, a diverse career paths. Is that the right word to use here, going from like account development representative to now being the vice president of marketing? Is that like, would I use the word diverse, or what would you call it?
Yeah, it's been a good range of positions and things that I've been engaged with in terms of just parts of the business, skills needed, and everything else. So diverse is a fair word.
And so if you would look back, because like people starting out from your position, and they could have ended up being 10 years the same role or now doing whatever you're doing. What did you do differently? Basically, what do you think you're in that position right now?
So funny enough, the account development position we were talking about, to this day, I still say it was the hardest role I've ever had. Lowest paying, hardest role I've ever had. Pure prospecting, trying to convince people to talk to a sales rep. So that, I think I learned that in a back-end operations role I was in. But I would say the account development role, it really taught me a good bit about how to approach prospects who have little or no familiarity with you, your company, your product, and how do you entice them? How do you get a conversation going? So this translates perfectly well over to the marketing side of it, but leading with features doesn't convince people to buy. Leading with price doesn't always convince people to buy. Then you're at a race to the bottom. What works is helping them solve something that they're struggling with, or helping them perform better in their role. But the caveat is doing that not as the hero of the story, but as the guide. They're the hero. You have to let them kind of find their own way to it. But when you're shouting from the rooftops, look at how great I am, look at how shiny my product is, all that stuff, like they don't care. They're not interested. They want to know how they can be great, how they can, get the gold star and everything. So that's the balance that you have to find, is how do you help them uncover that pain or the thing that they can do better, but also doing it in a way where it's like, I'm going to be here to support you, but this is really your journey to go on.
Did you ever read the book Brand Story? Is that
yeah. It's a great book.
Okay, I know where you got that from the guy. I love it. We use that for the webinars, by the way. We have this framework and we share it with people coming on the webinars, so that there's like, this is the framework you need to use, because indeed it's really about guiding them. It's not just about we're the best. No.
Yeah, it works. And I mean, that's basic. God, this would take me back to high school. Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. I mean, that's where it all stems from. If you ever go look at like any movie, any great story, it all follows that same kind of like the hero's journey, the arc of it all. And yeah, the building a story brand just took that and applied it over to the B2B space.
Love it. It's also like, even when you write ads, I would say I always compare it with the James Bond story, basically. So James Bond always starts the same thing. You have James Bond like cut down or like tied up somewhere, and he's like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? And then suddenly you get this snap. It's like 6 months earlier, and you're like, I want to know what happened. I'm gonna keep on watching. I want to see what's the end.
I really want to try it for a video ad now.
It works very well, but technically we're just applying principles from movies just in ads now. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel has already been invented hundreds and years ago. They already know how to get people watch a video of not just 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but an hour.
Yeah.
Imagine that you can create, I think I was shared in the Slack 2 days ago. It was like, oh, this is an amazing advertising. I forgot the name, but it was like an advertising that didn't look like an advertising for the first, I think, like 2 minutes, because it was like, oh, this is super fun. It was like, I don't know, it was like people, not emojis, but like these cartoons talking to each other, like in a fun story. And then at the end, you realize, oh, it's actually an ad. I've actually been watching an ad for 2 minutes. This is amazing.
Yeah, humans love stories. At the end of the day, I mean, that's what it is. Get them to understand what it is, and then at the end you can tie it together. But yeah, that's an effective ad right there.
Exactly. And walking me to, because you've had experience at Refine Labs, which is, I think, well known for its demand acceleration, I would call it, for B2B SaaS. So walk me through how that influenced your approach to marketing.
Yeah. So before Refine, as I was saying, as a big enterprise company, what I loved about Refine and what it really did was it solidified what I was sensing and what I think a number of marketers sense, that like when you run digital marketing programs, more at the top in terms of leads, in terms of dollars, doesn't mean more revenue at the bottom. Or I guess to bring it like back to like Chris Walker would always say, like, not all leads are created equal. So a lot of us would just say, like, we need to increase our revenue goal, so marketing, go get more leads. It's like, okay, well, now we'll just push out another ebook, we'll push out another webinar, but those aren't really people ready to buy. So what Refine Labs allowed us to do was it empowered us to help organizations shift from that kind of mindset where it is like, we need more, we need MQLs, all that stuff, to saying, is that the most appropriate North Star for marketers to truly understand how they're impacting the business and the approach that's needed? So what we did was said, like, if we stop focusing on this more, if we dig into like, what are those more leads doing or not doing in terms of conversion, you start to look and see, okay, let's just work backwards and see those that come from marketing and do become customers, what common traits, sources, inputs, what's happening with those journeys that we can do. So biggest one that he would always talk about is just like true intent. These aren't people that are downloading an ebook, but they're people that come to the website. Buyers are very smart. They know, go to the top right of any website when you want to talk to someone or do something. So talk to sales, start for free, whatever. So we're like, okay, the majority of people become customers. They are coming to us versus us doing outreach or trying to force them through this funnel. They're coming in through that on their own. And so once you're there, if that's your lead, now you have a whole world of new levers that you can pull that you didn't used to have if you were only looking at MQLs, because you would have stopped there if your goal was MQL. So now you're thinking, okay, if our approach is revenue pipeline, what else can we do with these leads once they've come in? So you have things like the path to purchase optimization. So all your conversion rates from, well, what happens after they submit that form? Are they talking to a BDR? Are they talking to a sales rep? Where are they falling out? Why are we winning? Why are we losing? And so this forces you to focus on the metrics that truly matter. So it's not the cost per leads, like you and I were joking about a little bit ago, but it should be the customer acquisition cost. So instead of how much does it cost to get someone to hit that form, it's how much does it cost to get someone to hit that form and then become a paying customer for us. And that changes everything. So that's been something that has really helped and shaped the way that I'm approaching marketing here at Loxo. And to tie it all back together, what that approach does is it forces you to work very closely with sales, because now you've got that overlap between, well, what happens between when they hit that form and then working with BDRs or AEs, and also customer success teams, customer support teams. What happens after they become a customer? Who is a great customer? Who's not a great customer? And use that to inform that loop of, okay, maybe we target more of these people, less of these people, more of this industry, companies of this size. So it's this great feedback loop. And that's what that should really be helping you do as a marketer.
Love it. I have a few questions on Loxo in a second, prepared and lined up for you on cost per lead and MQLs. But that's really great, because I don't think a lot of marketers do that. I don't think a lot of marketers come from sales. Actually, the best marketers I've met mostly come from sales. They've come from sales and then they walked up to marketing. They're like, oh, this sounds more fun, but they understood the fundamentals of sales.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a skill set that when you understand how people buy, thought processes they go through, who they need to involve, how they influence those decisions internally, it completely changes your approach to being able to proactively think as a marketer. Okay, what assets do I need to create? How should I help them manage up? Do I start showing ads to their manager so they're like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that ad the other day. That's ironic timing. And as a marketer, you're just like, no, it's not. But it helps them. So yeah.
Oh man. And you obviously did some cool stuff to get to this level, basically. So kudos to you. That's pretty awesome to see. But I always say you cannot get to the top unless you fuck up. You have to take some risks, not the biggest risk most of the time. You can take risks, but you need to take some risks, and some things just fail, some things just work out. What's top of mind when you're like, man, this is one of my fuck ups, never gonna forget it? It happens.
Yeah, this one stuck with me. Boils down to attribution, but I remember first company, I would spend hours poring over opportunity report change logs and pulling out opportunities that were sourced by marketing but overwritten by sales reps as saying like, no, it was AE initiated so that they could get credit commission for it, because that's how the payout structure worked at the company. It was like, if marketing sources it, sales doesn't get credit. If sales sources it, they get paid on it. So this would lead to arguments where attribution divided the marketing and sales teams, like to the point where the relationship was not good. We weren't collaborating, and surprise, surprise, like we weren't hitting pipeline and revenue targets as a company. So like that's a big fundamental issue, right? So after that, what stuck with me is I was like, well, me poring over those reports, like that's a waste of my time. Leads to conversations with sales leaders where all it does is making them mad because they're going to try to defend their teams. We're going to argue over attribution and not like, how are we helping the company grow? So that experience is what has ultimately helped me say, like, I will never let attribution get in the way of company growth. We should all be on the same team, back to sports. So like no one team is more important than another when you're in a B2B SaaS space. Like the purchase path is way too complex for any one team, touch, whatever, to say like, this is why the purchase was made. So taking that learning over here, like at Loxo, so we launched a PLG motion recently. We used to have a freemium version, but now we have a true free motion. And
just for the people listening, the product-led growth motion, right? Just to,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, marketing in our acronym. So yeah, PLG is when a user can go and just like sign up, get started with your product right away. So
awesome.
We have a dual motion go to market. So people can choose either to self-serve or they can say, hey, I want to talk to sales. That's a sales-led growth model. And so we have both. What I was learning was we had a number of perfect fit customers signing up for the product-led motion, but no one was following up with them. And I'm thinking, these are layups. Like, why are we not going and helping them, adopt the product quicker, get them into paying contracts or something else? And so I talked to the BDR team lead and he said, well, the rules are we aren't allowed to follow up until 15 days because that's when the free trial expires. So after day 14, the credit goes to the PLG sign up for attribution, BDRs don't get credit until that's done, and then they can say, hey, we spurred them on since the trial was done. And in my head, I'm like, this is so backwards, it's not even funny. So I said, let me go work out the details. You get your team calling on these right now. I'll figure out like the commissions, payouts, anything else. But that's a perfect example of you have the epitome of perfect customers at your fingertips, but you're letting something like attributions, commissions get in the way of them becoming what should be long-term customers, business revenue. Like that's where it doesn't make sense to me. So you can either look at that as one of two ways. Like, do you let that stop you from growing as a business so someone can get a short-term commission payout or something, or do you learn from that, adopt it, and then everyone wins when they become a paying customer?
Oh wow, that's an amazing example of systems that break, companies. And we're not talking about wrong targeting of Facebook ads or whatever it is. We are talking, systems that are holding the growth back. That's amazing. And walk me through like the fixing basically. So how did that, like, you got me, like you did the James Bond thing on me. It's like you told me the story, but now you got to finish it basically.
Yeah,
it's
so
like, so what happened?
I'm tied up at the rafters trying to figure out how to convert these customers. No. So it's basically just working. I worked with the BDR manager. I said, just have them call right away. Well, I'll figure out the long-term tail of this, but like get them on these lists. They stare at these waiting for day 15. I'm like, tell them to move their activity up to today. They can start calling on them now. So from there, it's just going and working with the leadership team and saying, here's how they've been historically paid. It's been based on, commissions for who sources what or anything else. I said, it's a simple tweak where we have a field that says like BDR assisted more or less in the person's name. And like, we just removed that it has to have original source equals BDR initiated or, PLG sign up to, I don't care what's in that field. Is there a BDR name assisted attached to that field? And if it is, that's the rule to get them paid out. So don't worry about that source. Worry about, did they nurture in the journey? Because that's honestly the biggest part of it. Is when you're signing up for a new product, usually people do it because they don't want to talk to sales at the end of the day, right? Like they want to go figure it out. They want to learn. But if you think about a lot of the trial experiences you do, you go sign up once, you plop around the platform for 30 minutes and it's either too confusing, you don't get a lot of value out of it. So what I say is when you have that BDR following up, one, it's like an additional reminder that they're there. And two, instead of telling them, and what we do is we tell them like, do not pitch the product. Do not try to get them on a sales conference. Lead with a consultative approach and say, hey, notice you signed up. Like, here's 3 super helpful resources to get started. A lot of people get stuck at areas 1, 2, 3. Here's some things to think about. Or let me know if you want to hop on a call, 30 minutes. Happy to talk you through, like, what are you trying to solve for? How are you trying to use it? And when you lead with that, you're drastically increasing your likelihood that they adopt the product. When they adopt it, they become a champion, potentially internally for a multiple user organization. They tell their peers about it because they're hitting their goals. They're doing well. So it's pouring fuel on the fire, so to speak, if you do it that way. So that's why I say, like, don't let attribution get in the way of that kind of stuff. Think about the long tail of it and what the outcome could be.
Is that working now? Like, is that, or is that,
Yeah, absolutely. I can say hands down, like the BDR team lead showed a report the week before and the week after we made the change, and it was like, boop, just straight up. So, it absolutely works, but it's an investment across multiple teams, departments to get on the same page and make sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction.
Love the story. I'm going to use this one. So that's an amazing story. First of all, actually talking about stories, I want to hear the 100-day story. So I ask this question a lot because I love the questions because I think it solves a lot of complexity, but also simplifies a lot of things. So here's the question. The first 100 days when you joined Loxo, give me like a roundout. Like, what was like, how was your first 100 days?
A lot of learning. I'm sure you've been part of organizations where you get the new marketing leader, the new finance leader, the new sales leader who comes in. They're like, my way or the highway. I'm going to rip everything up, do all of that. Usually doesn't work too well. So incredibly smart and talented team here. That's something that our CEO, Matt, prides himself on. I mean, we're a company that helps people hire the right people. So you can imagine the caliber of people that he's like, hey, I'm going to hire you. So it was fun to just sit back and be a sponge for a little bit and just see, well, what are the current processes? How are things being done? Where have we been? And the decisions that made what were the decisions that were made that helped us to get to where we are? So that all led me to understanding, most marketers think, okay, if you're the first marketing hire, the next one you need is a product marketer. Like, they have to help you with messaging. They have to help you figure out your audiences and all that. So for the first 15 days, that was in my head. But the more that I was a sponge, the more I sat around. And after I did some different analyses, I'll get to that in a second. But I was like, we have great product market fit. Like, our problem isn't going to be solved by problem marketing. Our problem is people don't know about us. Enough people don't know about us. Like, we win deals at phenomenal rates. So taking those types of insights and then applying that and saying, okay, like, you can come in with an outline or a tentative plan on what you think you need to do, but don't get so stuck into it that you won't budge from it. So what I did from that was, like, I had a 90-day plan, so to speak, that a lot of people usually do when they come in. So the first month was a lot of sit back, relax, not relax, sit back, analyze. Yeah, Matt would kill me if you hear me say that. Sit back and analyze is I did a lot of just reviewing of different processes, data to understand, like, what does our current state acquisition funnel look like? Let's run a win-loss analysis so that I can come in and say, here are some quick wins that we can do now that aren't going to shake up the system, but just optimize what we currently have. So that was one thing. Another was really just working with leadership to understand their priorities and then marrying those alongside mine. So what do they want to achieve? What do I know that we need to do so I can start to prioritize my list? So there's a number of things I want to do, but if leadership thinks this is super important, well, okay, let's move this up or start to work on the initiative that I have planned in there. Or if they're just like, yeah, we don't need to worry about that. Okay, that downgrades it on my list. So really understanding where their head's at so that, again, teamwork, making sure that everyone's on the same page. That's a big part of it. And then first 90 days, I call it, when we were talking about earlier, build the plan for the content engine. Don't build the content engine, but like, what do we want to do? What does it need to look like? What's going to be needed in order for it to be successful, scalable, healthy to do? So that was a big part of the first 90 days, was a lot of analyzing, working with the team, getting to understand, like, what are we trying to accomplish before just coming in and doing a bunch of stuff. Like, I'm not just going to do a bunch of ads like we were talking about earlier, but understanding why we should be doing certain things before we start doing those.
Oh, I love it. Do you recall any of those, like, quick wins? Anything that failed or anything that worked out?
Yeah, funny enough, I really didn't make that many demand gen enhancements in my first 90 days. Funny how that works, right? So a lot of them were foundational items. So quick wins, like existing stuff. So tighten up the path to purchase. I noticed that our demo to opportunity rate was a little lower than what I knew it could be. So I worked with our BDR team, sales team, to understand, here's some things that we can do. How do we go about it? So example is very common in B2B SaaS. Someone signs up for a demo, you get the thank you page. Hey, we'll be in touch in 2 to 5 business days. Good luck on that. One, they're already onto the competitor of yours that they can talk to you now. 2, you're lucky if you're playing email tag and you're able to catch one another to schedule a time when they haven't forgotten you. So tools like Chili Piper make it super, super easy to just say, like, let them schedule their time. So they are picking a day and time when they're free. They don't have to worry about, like, trying to coordinate or seeing yet another email come through in their inbox that's going to get buried. So that increased our rate by, I want to say it was about 10% higher just in the people that showed up to those. So things like that, where you don't have to change anything. You don't have to spend more. You don't have to do anything drastic. It's just a simple plugin. Those are some quick wins that I like to do.
Love it.
Yeah. So it's things like that. And then the unsexy came up, like, plan around data hygiene, process improvements, so the operation stuff on the back end. It's simple things like that, but just, it's our sales reps closing out opportunities when they should be. Are they using activity so we all know what's going on? Is data flowing from one place to another so everyone's aware of it? So things that aren't the most fun to work on, but are the foundational items that you need in order to grow later. Because if you don't have the right inputs and you go to pull reporting later, as well as I do, like, if you have bad inputs, you're going to have bad outputs. So if that's what's fueling what we're going to be pulling insights from, we need to make sure that those are accurate and correct. So a lot of unsexy stuff in the first 90 days, but look at any any sports team, it's like those are the foundational things that you have to do if you want to be successful. You have to have good cardio, you have to be in good health, you have to eat a proper diet. It's the same kind of stuff with the business.
I love how we didn't start about like the tactical stuff, but actually you call them unsexy, unsexy but needed. I would almost say, like, you're not gonna like eat a big cheeseburger and then go for the big game. Basically, you're gonna make sure that you prep your meals to coming 6 months and then go for the marathon. Basically,
Exactly.
So I love that you have to work on the unsexy stuff, but I feel like these unsexy stuffs, they take a long time. I would say it's not something. Well, the chili piper thing is something you can say, okay, damn, that's quick. But data hygiene, example, that's not just something like tomorrow I'm gonna say, okay, data hygiene installed. No, it's like an ongoing thing, basically.
Yeah, and it's still going. There's always small things to do with it, but those are the continuous 1% improvements. If you keep knocking those out along the way, it's only going to help you long term.
Totally agree on that. So I'm glad we're on the same line there. We talked about this in the beginning, basically. I think it was when you were mentioning not the football career, but your other careers, about treating symptoms, basically. So I understand, I mean, you focus on the full customer journey. I think that's super important as well. And sometimes people are fixing root cause, like, they're not really getting to the root cause. They're just like fixing symptoms. Can you give me like an example where a team was wasting effort on fixing symptoms versus like finally getting like to the root cause and then fixing that?
Yeah. So this is actually a few examples I came across with when I was at Refine, a lot of VC-backed companies. So common trend is we need more revenue, or we're not closing enough revenue. How can marketing support that? So the symptom fix is we need more from marketing. So let's add more spend. Let's get more leads. Let's do all of that. But if you go layer deeper to start to understand the root cause, it's like, okay, well, if we're not closing enough revenue, let's figure out why are we not closing enough revenue. Let's look at all the inputs that lead to that and start working back from there. So win-loss analysis. I love this stuff. I'm a data geek, but again, another example of it's not the sexiest work, but it's going to uncover a lot for you. So what this showed in a number of examples where I've almost said, like, if you're experiencing this, more often than not, I'd start at this step. I've like moved this up to just say, start here versus starting from scratch every time. But do win-loss analysis. And what it showed in the both times I did it was that the acquisition funnel was relatively healthy from top to bottom. The biggest eye-opener was that in both instances, they had a very low win rate. They were often like 10%, 15% win rates, when B2B SaaS, I usually like to see, from sales qualified, it should be 25 to 33%. You're winning 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3 deals. So when I saw that, I'm like, that's interesting. Let's go another layer deeper. And that's where data hygiene, I was like, let's look at the reasons for loss. You should have your sales reps putting these in on every deal. Why did we lose? Was it due to a competitor? Was it due to pricing? Was it due to functionality? So you can do that. And the heavy majority were due to pricing. So I'm like, okay, cool. I know we're not winning deals at the rate we should be. And then it's due to pricing. So marketing now is the answer. Let's do more. Let's keep putting people in the top. No, because marketing is working. We're clearly demonstrating that there was a desire from the people as they were coming in, acceptable cost per demo. They were progressing to opportunities. No problem. Everything was looking good there. So it's not a who we're going after with the messaging, anything else. The drop off was at the final signing stage. And what that told us was that the value perceived by the prospect didn't align with what we or they as a company wanted to charge for it. So you have two options from here. You can either drop the price to match market expectations, or you build more into your product so that it's worth the cost of it. So that's an example of, like, if you treat the symptom, you're just going to spend more, keep driving those leads, but you're going to keep having people fall out at that closed one stage, or not get to that closed one stage. So this is the type of thing where it's like, always go a layer deeper to truly understand, are we getting to the issue here, or are we just band-aiding it?
It's like, I think in Japan, I think it was Toyota that would implemented the 5 whys. It's like, every time you ask a question, why? And then you really get to the root cause of, like, oh, that's the important stuff we need to work on, not just on the first thing, but on the 5th thing, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. I know every 5-year-old also asks to ask why to everything too. So I'm wondering if they're onto something that we forget as we get older.
It's I think it's 5 years from now. Let me know in 5 years from now how many Ys came from your daughter.
I know. I'm not going to let her listen to this podcast.
I understand in that sense. Walking to the last topic you mentioned around the root cause and the issues, basically, you mentioned earlier that the root cause of people not closing enough was, well, because of attribution, SDRs, or I call them SDRs, some call them BDRs, whatever you want to call them. They're not calling because, they only get attributed after 15 days trials, basically. That was marketing attribution being the root cause of closing, basically. What's your approach to attribution? Because I know you worked at Refine Labs. Now you're trying to implement that at Loxo. What's your take on attribution?
The easiest way is there really isn't one touch point that is more important, more beneficial than others. I mean, if you're B2C, if you're something small, if you're at the grocery store, you see a Snicker bar on the rack next to the checkout line, it's like, okay, well, it wasn't a commercial that did it. It was having it right there for an impulse buy. B2B aren't impulse buys. So the general approach that I like to take is triangulating multiple data points to understand items that positively contributed towards a purchase versus trying to assign credit values to any one touch point, one team, or anything else. So the way that I like to think about this when I say triangulate is 3 inputs, so to speak. The first one is your basic tech input, HubSpot, whatever your attribution tool is, but that's often going to be last touch. What was the last channel, medium, source that drove them in when they finally said, hey, let's talk, or they get a call? So this is going to show up direct, organic, paid search, G2, AE, cold outbound, whatever it is. That's great to know, because those are okay. Like, what are the places where we do a better job of at least getting people across the final finish line? As marketers, what we should be wanting to know, though, is, well, how do we get people even close to that finish line in the first place? And then the example of Loxo, where my biggest thing was like, if I relied solely on tech, I would have missed a lot of stuff, because I would have seen a lot of direct and organic, which we didn't really focus much on SEO or a lot of our website. Our biggest driver to this day is word of mouth, like people who use the product, people that are in there. And so that's where, how do you uncover that kind of insight? So Refine Labs playbook, how do you hear about us? Sticking that on your form when they come in and understanding this is probably the most meaningful touch, or where they really did first learn and engage about us the first time. So that's incredibly important to know. And usually this is going to be, I heard about you all from my peer Jimmy. I came across you in this community. I listened to your CEO on a podcast. So it's like, okay, those are great inputs for us to know. Like, these are where we are creating awareness or helping our market understand what we do. And then the third triangulation is, once they have come in, sign up for a demo, they get on a call with the BDR sales is in sales discovery, which they spend 3 minutes asking, what else was helpful along your way to understanding us? Did you explore other people? Were you doing research on us in other ways? Did you go on YouTube to try to find a video of how we work? Did you hop over to our PLG version to play around with the product a little bit? And so what you can do there is, instead of assigning values, it's just, you're going to start to see buckets that are getting bigger or smaller than others. And that's going to help you inform, okay, where should I invest more or less time as a marketer? So again, no one bucket is more important than another, because if you pull bucket out, things are all going to get worse across the board. But it's balancing your time and effort and resources into, okay, how much do we put in each of these? That's help, I think, to ultimately get the business results that you want.
I think what I love, so while you were telling me this, I was thinking about a few things. I think what you're basically mentioning, and I think I love that, is HubSpot use last attribution, basically, just like Google Ads, last attribution. Okay, they clicked on an ad, they converted, basically. So that's your last touch, I feel. And then you described the second part, which is the demand gen stuff. Where did you hear about us first? That's the demand gen stuff, basically. And then you mentioned the third pillar, which was, for me, interesting. I'm just holding my hands up like this. But, and then you basically asked the question, what else was helpful? And that's basically just asking, what was your buyer's journey? What was in between this thing and that thing? And how did that come across? So I can invest not just in the last and the first, but also in the things in between, basically. So I think that third pillar I love that one. I have to say.
It's a helpful one, and it was probably about 5 years ago. Multi-touch attribution was huge, right? Tools like Visible and everything else, and they were onto the right thing with it. They were trying to understand what are all those in-between touches. Where I think it got caught up, though, is that it could only really track digital touches, unless you did a lot of operations work to plug in like your sales emails,
offline conversions.
But that's the biggest part, is that you uncover with these is so much happens offline that you're never going to be able to track. So you could pay $150,000 a year for a tool like Visible, or you could just spend 2 minutes on discovery call and ask them yourself, and save some money, get something that's a little bit more helpful than needing a data analyst and God knows how much software to get into. But that's where I say sometimes like just common sense plays. It's a lot easier.
And because I mean, in theory, this sounds cool, right? Let's bring it to practice, basically. So in practice, there's still commissions, or there's channels like, I would say, demand channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you want to call it as channels. But then there's other types of channels, which is product-led growth, marketing, SDRs, sales, basically. That's your channel above that, basically. And then it gets complicated, I feel, because then it's like, okay, who contributed to what, basically? So how do you work with that? How do you attribute to the right, I would say, second channel? You would almost call it like bigger channel buckets. How do you contribute to that?
It's a good question. You can look at the macro of your win rates of when those larger channels were or weren't involved in the customer process. So if you are capturing that information, an SDR was involved, they came in through PLG or didn't, a sales rep did or didn't talk to them, I can promise you'll see different win rates by each of those. And so that's where you can start to figure out, like I did with the PLG thing, when an SDR is involved with the PLG sign up, we convert them at a much higher rate than if an SDR is not involved. So again, you don't have to overly complicate it. Just add in that layer, that variable, pull it in and out, and then segment the data by that. And you can start to see some of those different efficiencies within the funnel.
Okay. So basically you're taking a channel and then other people can contribute to that channel, but you still have your first source and then other channels can contribute, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. I had God, I never thought I'd reference this class again. In college, I took a course called econometrics. I'm not a stat person, but that course was one of those types of things where it's like, you've got 10 different variables that come into play with, a certain outcome. How do you uncover which variables matter? And it's using data analysis to start to plug them in different ways to uncover, like, okay, which ones have positive, negative correlations, all of that. And it's that same kind of practice here where it's like, you're going to have multiple variables in, but when you pull one in or pull one out, does that all of a sudden change the outcome in a heavy way? And that's how you know this is an impactful channel.
I think that's also where marketers nowadays will have to grow, with all attributions going away, pixels going away. Cookies going away, pixels being just demolished, basically. I think that's also where marketers will need to grow. They'll need to understand the macro, how macro things grow in a company, not just this ad did X, Y, Z, but actually Facebook as a channel, LinkedIn as a channel, demand gen as a channel. How is that contributing to growth? And we'll have to think a little bit more up instead of that specific ad. So I love that we're having a chat about this instead of the technicalities, I would say.
Correlation is real. I know there's people that are like, correlation is not causation. It's like, well, yeah, but if you don't have anything, it's better than something. There was an example with a customer. It was fascinating. I'd never seen anything like this, but we could predict, after seeing this enough months and quarters in a row, the number of impressions that we showed. We had their ideal customer profile, ICP, super dialed in on LinkedIn. The number of impressions that we showed and the amount of spend, that the CPMs are relatively healthy there, cost per 1,000 impressions. We could predict how many signups they were going to get the next month because of that. And so they knew, like, hey, we have to pull back spend. I'm like, okay, cool. You're probably going to get a little bit less in your top of funnel, just FYI. And the next month they would see that pan out. And that's a perfect example of, like, those didn't come through saying that they were LinkedIn leads or anything like that. But there was it was, I don't know, probably 0.8, 0.9 correlation where we could see what happens when you don't invest more or less in a certain channel, because that was one of their biggest drivers that we learned for them.
But that's indeed not marketing attribute. That's not like looking at your LinkedIn campaign and saying, oh, pixel fired, it's good. No, this is really having some sort of way to have granular data that you've captured to make that causation in the beginning, basically.
Exactly.
And I think that's the change where we need to get to. We need to have some kind of steering mechanism to say, okay, these type of people came in and that is data we own. This is because of X, Y, Z. And it's not in the ad platform, but it's in our platform that we've captured that, and we can start navigating those things.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal tool called critical thinking. The more you can learn to do it, the better you'll do.
I think you said it very well. I say this every time, like, people just have to get common sense. Like, most issues you can just solve with common sense. You don't need fancy tools for it. It's just like, should we do this? Oh, let's go and investigate. And it's like, no, it's just called common sense. It's fine.
It doesn't steer you wrong too often.
You have to bring it in nicely. That's the difference. Yeah, you have to say it in a nice way. Just to go back to Loxo, sorry, we diverted a little bit, but going back to Loxo basically. So we talked about cost per lead and that not being a good metric and really being revenue focused basically. Do you run cost per lead campaigns? Do you run lead campaigns, or is it like absolutely gone? Or do you feel there's some need for still having campaigns that bring in leads basically?
I don't. Caveat that with, I'm at one end of the spectrum. Like, I'm definitely on the far side of that. So it's not right for everyone. There have to be a number of fundamental things at play in order to do that, but I don't run any CPL campaigns. Closest thing I did to it would be Google search, like paid ads, but even those, unless they type in Loxo demo, I'm not driving them to the demo page. Usually it's to our home page, to a product page, somewhere where they can learn a little bit more about what we do. So the approach I take is educate and drive value. So I don't care if we generate 10, 100, 10,000 leads. I'm always looking at our pipeline and revenue numbers to understand if what we're doing is working. And that's a lagging indicator. So you do have that buffer in between, which is always hard. But what it does is when you focus on revenue, like we were talking about earlier, you realize that you have so many more levers to pull as a marketer when it's not just spend and lead and then, okay, it's now sales problem to deal with. So that's where it's been fun to do this, because I really get to work with a number of the different team members and everything else. So the downside is when you are removing lead gen or any of that, it's okay, well, if those are both longer term plays in terms of lagging indicators, I'm not going to know if this worked until 2x our sales cycle or whenever that is. How do you get buy-in in that interim? So it's like the long-term approach is like demand gen. We know it's going to work. It's going to educate. People are going to come in on their own time. But in the short term, the way I like to look at it is, what can we do with what is existing, what is already there? So what's already there in terms of like the people that are coming in PLG or asking to talk to sales. So really improving the performance level there. So enhancing the demo to opportunity rate, enhancing the product-led sign up to adopting the product. And so adopting, you'd have your own metrics. Like, they've logged in 10 times, they've set up their first campaign, they've done XYZ, whatever is important use case for your product, you can start to do that. So that's where, when you increase those, you'll be able to start see sooner results, because you're making enhancements to those already in the sales cycle. So instead of like 2x your sales cycle from net zero, I've never heard of Loxo, to finally get them to become a prospect or a customer, it's, well, there's already people that are familiar with Loxo and they've already started the sales cycle. So how do I speed that up a little bit or increase the likelihood that they will become a customer based on what I can tweak?
So because that's another topic, right? That is, what is the responsibility of marketing? Because for some CEOs, they're like, marketing is, you are taking care of the website, advertising, bringing people in, we'll take care of the rest. That's, I think, across the board, I would finalize that as my like CEOs looking at marketing. I feel
that's probably a majority, not a safe bet for the majority. Yes.
a safe bet for the majority. And what you've mentioned is you're looking at almost like product marketing. You're looking at, free trial to paid. Like you're almost stepping on other people's toes, you would almost call it, depending on which organization you land in. So did you just walk in and you're like, okay, I'm also going to be responsible for this? Or did you just say, I'm going to help out as marketing? How did you get the buy-in to be able to work on these things?
Yeah, it was the helping side of it. So there's a lot that sales has historically owned, that customer success has historically owned. When you come in as a new person, you have to be mindful of that, because if these people have owned it, that's part of their responsibility. That's part of, their role. And most people don't like being told what to do at the end of the day. So back to just general teamwork and how to make things work. It's understanding that marketing needs to play in all of those. So I would meet with sales leadership. I would meet with our customer success leadership and say, what are you working on? Here's some areas that I see some overlap with us. How can I support you as a marketer? Is it with more content? Is it getting different feedback loops pulled in? And working from that lens where we really do have to walk arm in arm in order to accomplish it. So they know more than I do. They've been in the role longer. They've been working with customers longer, prospects longer. So that's where just saying like, how can I help you, will open up all of the doors. Cause then you don't have to guess as a marketer. I think they'll want this type of content or this web page, but they'll flat out tell you like, we really need more customer stories. We really need an ROI calculator. We really need, insert whatever thing there. And that will help you prioritize and understand, okay, what's going to move the needle in terms of business results? How's this going to help strengthen my relationship with them in the first 90 days so they do see us as a partner? And how are we going to grow as a business?
Lovely. And walking, because that's a question I had as well, is like you've mentioned a few things: ROI calculators, customer stories, content, basically, right? When you walked in, when did you start building out the content plan, basically? Or are you building out a content plan? Because I feel like you're talking a lot about, okay, content is one piece of the puzzle and I need to have that across my entire journey. Like, how did you start building out your content plan, I would say?
Yeah. Identifying what we did and didn't have, meeting with those leaders to say, like, what do you wish that we had? Or what are your team members kind of like jerry-rigging, pulling together to try to make something work that's needed? So being methodical about what will actually be helpful to the team versus making those assumptions early on. So that was the first 60, 90 days. So I always knew there was no major content engine here. So that was an issue of itself, because that's what's going to fuel, future blog posts. It's going to help give us customer stories, other pillars that we can pull in. We're going to be able to have videos, long form, training videos, short form. So anything that can be pulled out of a longer conversation, like a podcast, and then have, okay, what was that really smart thing they said for 2 minutes there? That's like a quick tip that someone's, if they're scrolling LinkedIn, or I want to toss this in a sales email, that distills it down or just like helps pack that extra punch. So those are some things that it's like, okay, I want to get to that, but before I can start that, I need to understand, like, well, what are the conversations that need to be taking place in those podcasts or in those training videos to get to that content? So I've always kind of known at the large level, what do we need to have to be successful with that? But until then, it's like, if we just started up a podcast, I'd be blabbering on about not really knowing what should we be talking about, who should we be having on, anything else. So that's kind of what ultimately led to, like, that's the overarching vision. And then as time went on, I was able to start to dial it in a little bit more and put some guardrails around, okay, it's like, who do we have on? What are we talking about? And what are the different mediums that I then need to distill this content pillar piece down into, so it's actually usable and consumable?
Okay, got it. So for me to understand, and for everybody to understand, you would say interviews. If I understand, to distill it to the topics, is like interviews with the current people, what's missing, just to build the content roadmap, basically. And then from there, kind of see what else will we need in the future in order to fuel the growth. I think that's how we distill it. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's a much more concise way of putting what I just said in 5 minutes. So you're good. You're a good man.
Appreciate that. And from there, I just have a final question. So this is where I'm having difficulties with, and I feel when I speak to leaders, they're having difficulties as well, is how do you balance short-term like tactics with long-term strategies? Because some things just take long-term. For example, a long-term strategy is we need a marketing automation system to get in place. That's long-term. You're just not, oh, let's experiment on this thing. It's like, yeah, just a thing that you have to do. So how do you balance short-term and long-term strategies? Like, what's your methodology? Is there any way, like a quick tip that you would share is like, okay, this is what I'm doing in order to say, okay, these is the short-term things I'm going to do now, but I'm planning ahead for the long-term. I need buy-in. I need to get this done.
Yeah. And I really like the way that you phrase this, because you said short-term and tactics together and long-term and strategy together, which is exactly how it should be. Strategy is long-term, tactics are short-term. So strategy, one strategy, we are going to, and this is my use case here at Loxo, we're going to build awareness. We're going to educate the market. We're going to provide them with value, and we're going to build trust with our brand. So what does that look like? We're going to build awareness around who we are as a company, who we serve, the types of problems that we solve, educate. How do you solve those problems? We're giving away a lot of content for free that teaches them best practices, tips, things that they should be aware of that just anyone in the category will technically benefit from. It's going to help educate buyers that go to our competitors, and that's completely okay. Because what it does is it builds trust with us at the end of the day. And that's a part of the feedback loop that makes it so when they are ready to buy, or when the need is large enough, instead of going into Google and saying, what's the best recruiting software? They just go loxo.co. They come straight to our website. So that's where you win. So you don't have to pay for all the paid search stuff. You don't have to compete with countless others in a very crowded space, which we are. So that's the strategy. That's what we want at the end of the day. Tactics, so balancing the short-term side of it, is okay, well, as we think about that, and we do need to learn how and where do we build awareness? What types of things should we be creating to help educate? What's valuable to our audience? And then how do we build trust? So that's where you get to introduce new channels, new mediums, new messaging, and those are all going to help educate you on all of that. That's going to fuel the long-term feedback loop to help you understand where should we be doubling down as a company and where should we be avoiding as a company. So when you do those short-term tactics, when you try a new channel, hey, I'm going to go try out Microsoft ads. Google's been great for us. We've been getting a lot of leads, using this as an example, but I think there's more opportunity in paid search. So that's a new channel where it's like, hey, we think this could work. Let's go try it out. That's a tactic that plays into the long-term. There's new platforms popping up left and right. So we know recruiters are always on LinkedIn. So, hey, LinkedIn's a great spot. We've noticed that when we talk to customers, a lot of them say they've been going over to YouTube to watch demo videos. So, okay, let's go try a little bit of YouTube ads or putting more video content out there and see what happens. So those are the types of tactics that you can do where you have that loop of knowing like, okay, there are success stories, customers coming in that have talked about those. What happens if we push that a little bit more or pull it back? Does that make an impact for us? And then you can start to incorporate those tactics. Let's invest 70% here. Oh, it's working. Let's invest 85% here. And you can start to play with it that way. But it all fits in with that larger strategy of what are we trying to do with our market at the end of the day.
Okay, I think I love that story, so I'm going to close off with this story. Maybe final question. If you would... I ask this question and I sometimes can't answer it myself because I'm out of inspiration. But if you would look at your, like, let's say 10 years ago, you start out it wasn't marketing career, but like SDR, account executive career. And now you're like, now you know what you know. So what would you advise your younger self, basically, as of now, like knowing the stuff that you know now?
Yeah. Okay. Knowing that I'm going marketing track, biggest thing I would tell myself is you cannot buy your way to product market fit. And what I mean by that is you can't just throw ad dollars at something and expect your business to take off. Demand generation is great if you have that product market fit already. Think of it as putting more gasoline in a well-built engine. Product market fit is your engine, so to speak. So if you don't have product market fit, if you don't have a good engine, it doesn't matter how much gas you're going to pour into it. It's just going to go right into the bottom underneath your car. Nothing's going to run. So I've seen time and again companies that, working with a lot of VC companies, especially, was, hey, we've got $150,000 this month. Let's go to market. Like, well, who are we going after? What's your messaging? What's the value prop? All of that. And they're like, I don't know, just put ads up. I'm like, well, doesn't quite work that way. We can run it, but you're not going to be happy with the results. So that's one of the biggest differentiators. I've seen organizations that have had 1/10 of that budget spending $15,000 a month make more, get a higher ROI. Because I mean, different ACV, different contract values, retainer revenue, all that. But I've seen companies with a much more limited budget that were very dialed in, knew their product had fit, do phenomenally better than a company that's just got a blank check from a VC.
I think that's a good marketing lesson to close off. Thanks, man.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you for joining on the podcast. Learned a few things myself as well, so I'm really grateful of the conversation. I didn't hear the baby, by the way, so that's amazing.
Hey,
maybe the echo cancellation is
Mama's
working.
doing great. Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been fun. I appreciate you having me and such a good conversation with it.
Cheers, man. Ciao.
See ya.